Okay. So, theory of retail trade. Any questions? Rudy?
Yes, I'd like to understand the mechanism or the reason why the discount rate shoots up in case of a natural disaster. What starts this whole thing going?
Professor?
Perhaps somebody would have an opinion on that.
Why does the discount rate shoot up in a stricken country?
Because there's an immediate demand for a particular good that needs to circulate very quickly.
That's that's certainly an important part of the answer. An increase in demand means that in terms of social circulating capital, means increase in
propensity to consume a
Yep.
particular good goes up.
Yeah. We discussed this yesterday, didn't we? That the propensity to consume varies directly with the discount rate. That's usually the tricky part, because sometimes there is a direct and sometimes an inverse relationship between two variables. And now the question is, if the propensity to consume...
What happens to the rate of marginal productivity in an environment?
The rate of marginal productivity of social circulating capital.
What will happen in that environment? It must move higher if the discount rate comes up with it.
Yes.
You know.
And the marginal productivity of social circulating capital varies directly with the discount rate.
Yeah.
So let's give this as a tentative answer. I'll think about that. That's a very good question, and since we are cooperating on writing a book, you can be sure that the version which will appear...
I asked you this question in Australia some time ago, and what you said made sense, but I'd like to go just a step further. Since the goods are destroyed, it's as if people were not buying it, because they can't buy it. So if they're not buying as much, then the discount rate goes up through that mechanism. They're not able to buy as much. It's as if they chose not to buy, but this is forced. And this may or may not be correct.
Let's leave it at that, and we work on that more.
Thank you.
And certainly we make sure that the version which goes into the book will be the correct version, and it will be detailed sufficiently. It's a very good question, and it is common experience, isn't it?
Yes.
That short-term interest, for instance, I don't like the example of war being declared, because this is a willful destruction of property and stores of goods and so on. But it's common experience that if the newswire carries war has been declared, then it's short-term
interest rates
shoot up.
Yeah.
And even in anticipation of a war being declared, you know. But Rudy is absolutely right. We have to work out the details, how this plays out in terms of social circuiting, capital marginal productivity, and the rest of it. Very important. Yes?
Well, I think the demand for the good that doesn't exist because the crop failed will be rising once an entrepreneur has identified the spread as a meaningful one to exploit. Okay, another word. And from that point on, the discount rate will start falling because the demand will. That's my way of seeing it. But there's an immediate jump in the discount rate. There's an immediate jump because there's no supply.
Yeah, nothing to consume.
There's nothing to consume.
Then arbitrage comes in.
And then arbitrage comes in. And
Yeah. If there's nothing to consume, it's equivalent to the social circulating capital decreasing, I suppose.
The productivity margin decreasing. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So as a tentative answer, we leave it at that, but we are going to work on this more. And I'm sure all of you will be interested in getting a copy of our book. Rudy and I are cooperating on putting this in a book form, and we'll try to do it as expeditiously as possible before you forget about what we have been discussing here. You'll get a copy of that.
Is that each series of lectures will be in a book form?
No. All the 20 lectures will be.
Right, but you're doing 4 of these, aren't you? 4 of these lecture series.
Ultimately 4, but right now we are doing one of the 4
so
courses.
So one book eventually for each of the 4 courses.
Yeah.
Okay.
So roughly speaking, 20 chapters of each of the 4 books.
If there's demand and this works.
All right. Now, I want to tell you something. We have actually 2 benefactors for our effort in the new Austrian School of Economics. One is this has been announced already, and but not all may have realized this. This Swiss firm, which is really a publishing house, but I think it's just a holding company for several arms. One of them is the very good, in my opinion, extremely good, one of the best websites. It's called the Daily Bell.
Yes, very good.
The Daily Bell. Now behind that stands a publishing house which has a name, I think ARB something is the initials. It is a free market-oriented book publication. And recently they formed a foundation which is to support any effort spreading the word about free markets. It's apparently well funded because a lot of business organizations are members and they are contributing and donating for such purposes. So we were the first recipient of not a very large one, but it was sufficient to announce a scholarship program which would cover the tuition and the cost of accommodation in this college for several students, and we are benefiting from this. That's one benefactor. But there is another benefactor which somewhat obscure because I have never met them. It's one individual. I have never met him. He lives in Malaysia. His name is Malik Yusuf. and he is apparently a well-to-do businessman in Malaysia. He was supposed to come to New Zealand when we were there, and I told him to come to the Ficino's to fundraising dinner, and then after that we can meet and talk and so on. Never met him, but we corresponded way back 10 years ago. We started correspondence on the internet. So apparently he did come to Auckland, New Zealand, and went to the Ficino's school, tried to get in, but it was sold out. It was a dinner, and he reported to me that he tried. Well, I said, why didn't you tell them to call me out, and perhaps we could have done something? And he said, didn't. But I said, you made a mistake, because I would have liked to meet you, and that was the chance I missed. So I've never met him, but we kept corresponding, and he is following our work here, what we do, what we try to teach and so on. Is an enthusiastic believer, but there is one point where we have disagreed, and we came back again and again to the same point, and we could not sort it out, and that's why I would have liked to have him here. So I invited him specifically come to this session to discuss the question, which is just as important as Rudy's question: is a higher discount rate good or bad for the country which experiences it? Higher relative to discount rates in neighboring countries? That's the question. As I have explained, or tried to explain in my first hour, it's a good thing because it puts into motion a movement of short-term capital in the form of the consumer goods in the highest demand, and facilitates fast healing of the damage which is done to the economy. He, on the other hand, argues differently. He says that a higher discount rate means lower price for the bill. This is definitely a inverse relationship, also very rigid, similar to the bond price and the rate of interest. They are inverse related. But here it's the same, principle is the same. This is not controversial at all, that if the interest rate shoots up, there's an immediate reduction in the value. It's simultaneous, so I don't even consider this two different events. It's one and the same event, but the two faces, two sides of the same coin. So he argues that as the value of these real bills fall, it's a loss to the country on which the bills are drawn. It's like if the bonds issued by a firm fall in the bond market, this is bad for the issuer because it means it's difficult to raise capital. So, we have been talking about this, and I was hoping that he would be here and we could have this discussion at the highest level, because somebody has been thinking about this for years, would be here and challenge me, and I would welcome that challenge. Now, in the last minute, he argued, apparently he's a Muslim because the Ramadan holiday started, and he just cancelled his travel arrangements. But he sent a similar donation to the Swiss, and he said that he is wishing the best and so on. So, as I say, we are the beneficiaries of two, and that may be a propitious start. Hopefully the support will continue and even multiply, and then we can have more frequent sessions or whatever improvements are possible. So I want you to remember the name of Malik Yusuf. All I know is that he lives in Malaysia, but actually he wants to leave Malaysia because he's complaining about the conditions there, not favorable for business. But that's really all I know about him. He writes in English, excellent English, very good choice of words and very well reasoned. So he's high caliber, and I would like to involve him more and more with our work here. I think he will be a benefit to our efforts. So we'll see how this plays out. But here it is, a problem, thanks to Malik Yusuf. Is a high interest rate beneficial or detrimental to the country which experiences it, and high in terms of relatively to this country in the neighboring countries?
Really?
A comment on this, I think the loss of value of the real bills is right and proper. It is in effect paying for the import of those goods. Clearly, if the goods come in, it has to be paid somewhere down the road. So it's going to be eventually settled in gold. So I don't see anything wrong with this. This is the flip side of the goods flowing in and the payment flowing out.
You agree with that?
I think that makes sense, yeah.
I would add, but for the discussion on this problem, that the increase in the discount rate is spontaneous.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
not lasting. It in fact drops after. So it's a very short term.
Well, just how short, depends on a lot of conditions, but let's say within 3 months there has to be a result, right?
But within that 3 months, for the real bills that are introduced to address the shock caused by the failed crop.
Yes.
During that 3 months, the discount rate will fall.
Yeah, well, it's self-healing.
Yes.
It's self-healing because arbitrage is instantaneous.
Right.
Once you have the spread, a lot of short-term capital will come into it and will have this effect what you are talking about.
And as a result, my way of seeing it is that a falling discount rate is good for the country.
Falling discount rate is good for the country. Yeah, so there's a shock,
There's a shock.
Almost instantaneous shock,
Causes the
but
demand to be met.
immediately the correction starts, although much more slowly, but within a 3-month period it can do a lot of healing, and it does. Yeah.
I think a distinction should be made between high and changing. There's a difference. If there's substantial variation in the rate, but not sort of an absolutely high rate.
No.
Because who's to say what's absolutely high? So it's the variation, I think, that probably has more of an impact than the actual level per se. Mark?
Well, I've got similar thoughts, but I would have kind of, in my mind, explained it like this, that these fall in the rate of real bills is kind of also a reflection of a real destruction, and perhaps, for instance, if you've got a bill which is expiring in a few days where this healing process cannot start yet, you also will have a real loss. I mean, it's nearly risk-free, but an extraordinary event like such a flooding could cause a risk, and then you also perhaps experience a loss if you draw the real bill, because there is this extraordinary flooding, so you experience a loss, but if you have the market mechanism work, then perhaps supply will come in again pretty soon, but for a short time, even investors in the bills could experience losses. Why not? So you lose at first, but then the opportunity arises, and you can win again back something.
Assuming that the bill market is still functioning, I think, if there's just 2 days to expiry, I don't think you will see much of a variation in the price, regardless of what the discount rate does.
It's not through the maturing bills, it's to the bills which are issued after the disaster.
Yeah, that after the disaster, but then you have to hold on to your pants and wait till they expire, and get the gold back. But this is what Rudy and I were discussing sort of last night, is that if you did have a substantial variation in the discount rate and you needed to liquidate the bills for cash, you might have to take a loss, but not in a bill that's just coming up to expiry.
Yes, but perhaps 2 weeks, I don't know which period, but if supply stops and you just can't, the bill isn't self-liquidating anymore because...
that good is still there, so it will still liquidate.
Well, then there will come the point where the supply has run out, and these bills which represent
That's after.
this time horizon, wherever that is, I don't know how long the chain takes, these will have trouble, and these will have the possibility that they are not self-liquidating, and where there is a real economical risk to the investor. So,
Reading.
Well, if the grain crop is destroyed, there were no bills drawn against that yet.
That's the point.
The bill is only drawn when it's delivered to the recipient. So in effect,
Import.
whoever is destined to get that grain will not get it. So that bill cannot be drawn because the stock was never delivered. So somebody else takes the place of that supplier and jumps in and delivers in their stead. And then there are new bills drawn.
Now, let me come out with my big gun, which is the fact that you have the option of repaying your bill. You don't have to wait until maturity. So look at the import-export picture. This country, which is stricken, is in need of imports, but he's also an exporter. And therefore, it has it's an exporting, we are assuming that there are no absolutely helpless countries which have no industry, no agriculture, nothing. So they have a pile of bills which previous exports have been paid, and these are maturing. So they see that the relative discount rate in the neighboring countries where these bills will be payable is low, relatively. So that's an inducement to prepay the bills. So presumably they have some gold, and they can take advantage of the relatively low discount rate in foreign countries by simply selling their bills. That's one thing. The other thing is the import into that country, which commands a high discount rate, which will give the inducement to the holders of this bill in the foreign countries to take advantage of the high discount rate, because this is a better return than they can get anywhere else in the world, assuming that this country has the highest discount rate in the whole world. There is no better return available as for such a type of investment as investing in real bills. So both the low discount rate in foreign countries and the high discount rate in this country is helping this. But this assumes that the country stricken has some gold. If there's no gold, there's no way to take advantage of that. And therefore, the saving, again, is here is an example of benefiting. You are self-insuring yourself for such a calamity. You have some gold in the country. So for the government to confiscate the gold coins of the citizens is just insane, because this is the cushion. Not the gold in the central bank vaults or in various other banks vaults, but the gold coins in possession of the individual citizens will be mobilized in case of such a disaster as a flood or whatever, because that is what will get the thing moving. You are set as a setback, there's no question. But with a little bit of reserve, you can just start moving again. Because if you don't have that saving, then these just remain opportunities, but you can't take advantage of them, the lower discontinued program and so on. So I think this is a big part of the argument, but as we have seen, there are several ingredients, and we just have to mash them and come up with that. That ultimately, I think, the verdict is that high discount rate is a temporary good, which helps reconstruction, get it started, and trade moving again. And this is the most expedient way of get out of the disaster, to take advantage of the opportunities offered by the difference in the discount rates. And we just have to put it in so many words, and I'm confident that Rudy and I can do this. And this is, I think, extremely important. It's really extremely important, because this self-healing capability of the world economy is something that has been forgotten. We have a world where the United States is the donor and gives aid to all countries, pays all the military bills of Israel, pays the flood damage in Pakistan, and just, at the same time it has wars going on, and who pays for the damages is another question. But certainly, this government charity is let me say, it stinks. It stinks because the government has no resources other than what it has taken away from its citizens. And these citizens, we have to look at them as not fat cats who can be skinned again and again, but they are producing individuals. And if you tax them or overtax them, then you are undercutting their productivity. And as a result, they will be less productive, and eventually this comes to an end, and you want to scrape the bottom of the barrel, and you don't find anything to scrape there because it's all gone. And therefore I don't believe in government charity. But this is what we have discussed here in the self-correcting and self-healing effect of world trade and the world economy is not government charity. It has nothing to do with government. It is built in. It's part of the gold standard, part of the bill market, and the natural instinct of the individual to work that much harder in case of a natural disaster. So with all the ingredients are there, it's just a good economic system which has to put these forces and focus the effort so that the recovery will be done expeditiously and quickly enough so that we can put the disaster behind us. I think this is very important. Let's see if there are further questions. I think it's also, sorry, I didn't know.
I have a question concerning your word of use, retail. You call it the theory of the retail trade.
Yes.
Why? Is there a, is there a theory of
really
wholesale trade coming up later on, or why retail?
Yeah, well, actually, we are contracting two different things because the discussion is very similar, but you're quite right. The theory of retail trade is a theory which refutes the supply and demand equilibrium analysis of price formation, because we say that the law of supply and demand simply does not apply in the retail trade if it's set up properly, which means gold standard and bill trading. Because an increase in demand acts not on the prices as suggested by the neoclassical theory, but it acts on the discount rate, as we have explained in great details. So the price level can be kept relatively stable even in the presence of demand shocks and supply shocks. We know both shocks are damaging. The demand shock is damaging to the consumer in the sense that if higher prices have to be paid, it's punishing all consumers when the demand may come from just a small part. And the supply shock, when there's an production or overabundance of goods pushing prices lower, will be damaging to the average producer who is counting on his profit margin in order to keep in business. So our answer is that in the retail trade has its built-in stabilizer, so to speak, which means that all the shocks work on the discount rate, and there is that much less shock is affecting prices, and this is good for everybody. This is part of the common good. So that is the story on the retail trade. This explains why I take the
distinction.
No, that I'm bold enough. Take the anyhow.
The stance. A stance. You're taking a stance.
Taking the courage to suggest that there is enough in this to call it a theory.
I don't dispute that for a minute.
Okay.
I think it's a beautiful theory. It brilliantly exposes the natural order of already there if we have the proper means of exchange.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it.
But it's just the word retail that I was.
Well, retail, because the retail prices are definitely not these on the model of supply-demand equilibrium. Because,
I think what you mean by retail is consumption related.
well, if that's right.
Yeah, and I'm unfortunately been conditioned to think retail wholesale. But your theory of what you call of the retail trade would have also apply to wholesale trade.
Only at the end of this
At the consumption
90
level. At
Yeah.
the consumption level, yeah.
At the higher level, when we talk about higher order producer goods, this is not going to be applicable. It's applicable at the retail level, and well, actually the wholesale is part of it because they are supplying the retail. But the further away you go from the consumer, when you take these more remote...
The consumer is the key here.
Yeah. Especially when you take for instance, mining operations or agricultural farms and so on. This is not applicable. They are too far removed. They fall beyond the 91-day limit, and therefore the bill trade, they don't have the advantage of the bill trade, and as a consequence the supply shocks and demand shocks would be they are less protected. But at least the retail, which is important because you want to, while you are protecting the consumer, you are really protecting everybody. And when people go into agriculture, they know that they are exposed to risks which cannot be managed the same way as other risks, because you depend on the weather, on nature, on various inadvertent possibilities which could be damaging. So you have gone into this line of business because you were willing to take the risk which goes with it. And you just get as much protection as there is possible against natural causes. But the protection of the consumer is in the center of the discussion. Okay?
If I could just add to that, my own business, building machinery, is very far removed from the consumer. And it's absolutely whipsawed by supply-demand, oversupply, undersupply, very cyclical, drops off, comes back. And one way to look at this is that the retail level, a small amount of gold circulation drives a large section of the economy. There's an amplifier effect. So if the supply, demand, or if you say the propensity to consume drops a little bit, this becomes very large, higher levels up. And that was our experience over many years, many decades of running the business, that the demand for machinery went much farther than down than the demand for potatoes. So from a practical point of view, yeah, this is the way it is, my experience.
So going back to Louis' comment, I haven't finished because you were quite justified to question why we call this retail, and I started talking about the gold standard. But the fact is that a very similar thing takes place in studying the gold standard, what we have done, this theory of retail trade, because the classical theory of the gold standard, which we are discarding as invalid, the same way as we discard the supply-demand equilibrium analysis price formation. The classical theory of the gold standard says that if there is an increase in the gold supply, then the adjustment takes place in the price level. So if in one country the supply of gold increases, then the prices will increase, so this country will be less competitive internationally, and therefore its exports fall off, imports go up, and there is this adjustment. And also trade balance or trade imbalance is correcting itself through gold flows. If a country is running a deficit, then it will induce a gold flow from this country to others until equilibrium is reached. Now, it's very much the same reasoning and the role and the formation of the discount rate which refutes this classical theory of the gold standard. In effect, what happens is that if the gold supply in one country increases, then there is no necessary increase in the price level. Because, well, you might just imagine that this is a gold-producing country and there is some innovation which makes gold mining more efficient, as we had an example at the turn of the 19th and 20th century. They discovered the cyanide process, which made gold production far more efficient than it has ever been throughout history. As a result, gold production went up. Now, suppose this happens in one country and there is a very large increase in mining output. Now, rather than the classical explanation, we have to emphasize that this new gold, extra gold, which is brought out of the bowels of the earth, is going to flow, before it does anything else, it's going to flow to the bill market. And as it does, the price of the bill will be bid up, it will be higher. Now, the inverse relationship between the discount rate and the bill price will make the discount rate shrink. And as the discount rate shrinks, this will bring out extra supply at the retail level. And this extra supply will prevent prices from rising. So the adjustment works not through the price system but through the discount rate and prevents the prices to respond. You see. Now, let's go to the extreme case that all the countries, with the exception of one, abandon the gold standard and gold becomes, so to speak, superfluous in the rest of the world. But this country is sticking to the gold standard. So all the gold from the whole world will descend on this country. The gold invasion. Tremendous increase in the gold supply, which means money supply. What happens then? Well, the discount rate will go to zero. Now, here it's very important again to remind ourselves that the discount rate is very different from the rate of interest. The rate of interest cannot ever go to zero. But this is not our topic here. It's a topic of another course, which I hope you will be taking in due course. We haven't planned yet when it will be, but we are definitely going to have a course on. And that's one thing. But when it comes to the discount rate, it's not unthinkable that it can go to zero. And this would be one example, that the whole world abandons the gold standard with the exception of one country which is sticking to it, and then there will be a tremendous inflow of gold. So, is it still true that there will be no increase in prices? I would say yes, if the proper measures are taken. What does zero discount rate mean? It means a very extreme increase in the social circuit in capital. In fact, it will be so big that the retail shelves will run, there will be no empty space on the shelves of the retail. So there will be street vendors, and people and retailers will use the sidewalk to display their extra supply of consumer goods, the much greater variety of supply than was possible at a higher discount rate. When discount rate is zero, then the sidewalk will be taken over, and everybody will become a retailer. The little children will start selling what they have and what they can get, because this effect, in effect, means zero credit. The little child can get, suppose he's selling pencils, for the sake of argument, he can get these pencils with zero capital. He can, from the supplier, who will come at the end of the day and collect the price of the pencil once the little kid has sold them. That's that's free credit in effect, zero discount rate. So people with zero capital, normally it's not possible, because even if you are selling apples, you don't have free credit. I mean, the apple supplier wants at least a token payment for the apple you get, and at the end of the day you pay. But there's normally no such thing as starting business with zero capital, except in that extreme case. So there is still no need for prices to go sky high, because the offer of consumer goods will expand so vastly that the consumer will not, using that word, chase the limited supply of consumer goods, because the expansion is so great in the supply because of that. Once you can start a retail business with zero capital, then you will see the it's not easy to envisage that, but if you think about it, you will agree with me that if interest rate goes to zero, then everybody will be a retailer. Everybody will sell something, cigarettes or pencils or apples or what have you, and make a meaningful business of it, because you need zero capital to do that. So this is very similar to what we have said about the theory of retail trade, but this is now the theory of the gold standard. A valid theory of the gold standard would incorporate the discount rate mechanism, and this will show that these extremes, on the one hand, when the gold supply shoots sky high, and there will be no necessary increases in the price level, but also when, for example, people start hoarding gold for some reason or other. Then the gold supply shrinks, and this would make Keynes say bloody murder. We can't have that, because then prices start falling. Keynes is wrong. Prices will not necessarily fall as a consequence of gold hoarding, because in case of gold hoarding, the discount rate will do what?
Start going up.
Higher, and as it does, the volume of social circuit in campus shrinks. And as it does, the supply shrinks and prevents prices from falling. And the propensity to consume is adjusting in the same way. So the two things are very similar, using the same argument, but they are really different. However, the discount rate mechanism has this two very important consequences. One, the retail; the other is the gold standard. So we have to have this proper explanation for both, how prices behave and how the gold standard behave, as if you take the discount rate into account. Okay, well, I guess it's time
for lunch.
Adjourn for lunch, and then
Back at 2:30?
2:30. Okay.
Ready? Everybody here?
Yep.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi.
Afternoon session is about to start, and the professor will now lead us a bit further into the field of the sovereignty of the consumer. Over to you.
Thank you. There was already a discussion on that. Peter did a good job on that, I think, and I want to continue the dialogue with him. So just to introduce the subject, I go back to the formation of the ask price and the bid price. The formation of the ask price has to do with the competition of the consumers, surprisingly, because you might think ask price is something within the domain of the producer, but as it turns out, the consumers are in competition with one another in doing horizontal arbitrage, and the competition of the producer comes into the picture as a result of the formation of the bid price. Did I mix it up? I'm sorry if I did. Yeah, so ask price, competition of the consumer; bid price, competition of the producers. So competition of the producers may or may not have the effect of lowering the bid price. In the opposite case, when it was the ask price, competition of the consumers had the effect of lowering the ask price. But here the marginal producer is confronted with a choice. He could do one of two things. He could compete, or he could decide not to compete with the other producers. If he decides to compete, then he will adjust his selling price to that of his competition, and will try to restore profitability through horizontal arbitrage. Well, we have been through that in sufficient detail. But if he decides not to compete, then he will drop out of the ranks of producers. Not only he will no longer be marginal producer, but he will no longer be a producer, period. And another man will take over as the marginal producer. In either case, the bid price will get lowered with the ask price, which is driven by the bid-ask arbitrage, will follow the bid price down. This is what happens in the case the competition is keen. But competition is not always keen, sometimes it is dull. And if it is, then the marginal producer may prevail in his effort to hold the bid price at the original level. So, analogously, competition of the consumers may or may not have the effect of raising the ask price. Did I say lowering? No. The competition of consumers has the effect of raising the ask price. However, these two cases are not symmetrical. On the face of it, you may have the impression that they are symmetrical because it's word for word a dual. One is a dual case of the other. Just change the word from bid to ask, from consumer to producer, and then you get a valid statement. But that's superficial, because in actual fact, the two cases are very far from symmetrical. The fact is that a rise in the ask price has an additional consequence which lowering the bid price does not. Because when the ask price is raised, then the vertical spread widens. And a widened vertical spread will bring fresh competition into play, which was not available at the time the vertical spread was smaller. Well, we know that the entrepreneurs are watching the spreads, and whenever a spread is wide enough, they will immediately start attacking it. So that's what happens. If the vertical spread widens, newcomers will enter the fray, and they will start to eke out a living for themselves, which the wider spread has made available for them. So while a price rise induced by increased consumer demand are mostly temporary, because they will quickly be filled, the goods will be delivered, and that will close the widened spread, so that the widening of the spread is temporary, because it lasts only as long as it takes for the producers to adjust, which they are definitely going to do. A decrease in price due to increased production, to the extent they reflect technological improvements and increasing productivity, this type of widening of the spread is mostly permanent. So that's the difference. The widening of the spread due to competition of consumers is temporary, because the producers are going to act, and that will close the spread again. But if we take the competition of consumers into account and the corresponding widening of the vertical spread, this will change the setup, in the sense that new producers will come in, and their competition is going to have an effect. Now, as an example, we might look at the very dramatic fall in the price of PCs, personal computers. If you really think of it, it's a fantastic chapter in the history of technology, because originally, before PCs became a commonplace, it was the mainframe computers, which meant that every company, even mid-size and small-size companies, had a mainframe. And then there was no PC, there was only a keyboard which was wired, hooked to the mainframe. And that was, in fact, IBM, I think I'm right in saying that, am I? That IBM staked its whole strategy on the future of the mainframe. This was one of the major blunders IBM made. They were betting on the mainframe, and they thought that that was the future, and they neglected to develop the PC line. And how wrong they were, because and they were the top guy in the castle, right? They were calling the tunes. Everybody thought that it is going to happen, whatever IBM wants. So this example shows that it's not like that, because some unforeseen factors could create a completely different outcome. Now then, PCs came into use, and they were very well received, and
were very expensive. And were very expensive.
And they were extremely expensive to begin with. But even so, consumers were buying. And the consumers' enthusiasm for the PCs was followed by an extremely dramatic fall in the price. So if you want to explain that, then you have to put all these bits and pieces together, which I have just enumerated, because this is not what a lot of people, including IBM, has expected to happen. Now, it's helpful to introduce a term here, and this is the feedback effect. I think you mentioned that, right? So we'll hear from Peter in a minute. The feedback effect means increased competition on the part of the consumers brings about increased competition on the part of the producers. Feedback, you see, and it's a positive feedback. There's also negative feedback, but this is an example of a positive feedback when the competition of the consumers perks up the producers to, they are encouraged, the producers are encouraged by consumer competition, and they will bring out a price adjustment for the benefit of the consumer, a lower price. Now, there is no feedback effect in the opposite direction. In other words, if the producers compete, this has no feedback effect on the competition of the consumers, regardless how keen that competition may be. So we conclude that the consumers have a veto power over the marginal producer. In other words, if the consumers do not agree with the steps taken by the producers, then they have a veto power. They hold the trump card, and with that, their vote is going to be decisive, regardless of the wishes of the producers and the behavior of the marginal producer. The predominant role in the process of price formation belongs to the consumer, and we express this by saying that the consumer is sovereign. It's his wishes which will be followed, regardless of the wishes of the producers and all the other participants in this drama. So because of this bias, there's a bias, it's not symmetric, there's a bias in favor of the consumers. And because of this bias, marginal utility should be considered as the primary factor in the formation of the price, while marginal profitability, which is also a factor, but it's not the decisive factor, it's secondary. So with this I would like to invite Peter to make comments on this, or objections if you have any, and then we can have an early debate of the question. All right?
I certainly concur with your vision, and I think I've given examples a few days ago, but you can think of everyday examples where this would be true. If there was a situation where this theorem would not work, it would falsify your theory, of course, but so far we haven't heard of any, so if anyone is invited to come up with an example, if they can, where this would not be. Now I can't. Of course the marketing people also have a role to play, and that you can see in everyday life, whereby, and I take the example of car makers or iPhone, Apple. There are several phones on the market, but they create in the consumer's head a perception that iPhone is beyond competition, and therefore there is only one competitor of an iPhone. iPhone, the phone from Apple.
Oh, yeah.
You have Blackberries. You have
virtual monopoly.
It's with the protection, of course, of the law. You can get trademark protection. You can get temporary protection of your intellectual capital, which will now eke out a little bit of a longer life for your product, and the horizontal arbitrage is a bit blurred by the, they have now to judge, will I get the Samsung or will I get the iPhone? Now that depends. But that's where marketing comes in. Not to distort the mechanism at all. In fact, it works perfectly. I have not, as yet, been able to come up with an example where this would not be the case. I can't think of any. Except Louis, maybe?
Maybe not, but what about if the consumption good is a financial product?
I think it would be a confusion to consider financial goods as consumer goods. I think that's my first instinct. I haven't really.
Because it would seem in today's world, anyway, not the gold standard world, that the marginal profitability is more important than the marginal utility.
However, I will go all the way with Louis, because when it comes to that question, the tampering with the gold standard or removing, complete removal, would what effect it would have on the consumer goods market and on the role of the consumer as sovereign, being the sovereign. Because there is a saying, I think it goes somehow like that, that whoever pays the fiddler will call the tunes, or something like that.
Pays the piper.
Oh, piper, sorry.
I think so.
That's right, you are right. Not the fiddler. We are talking about North American situation. So let's translate that to our theoretical consideration to fit the thing. It means that whoever provides the money, whoever has the power to print money and make it available to consumers, will be the chief protagonist, because the producers are no longer so much interested in the opinion of the consumer, but in the opinion of whoever puts the money in circulation. And I think I could bring any number of examples of that. I mean, just take the newspapers and their financial columns. This is just full of news items which have to do with the producers expecting a rise in the interest rate, or expecting a fall, or expecting an announcement from the government on this or that or that. But very few articles in the financial columns of the daily newspapers have to do that. This particular company is carrying out a new study of consumer preferences. They would rather spend their energy and time on studying the preferences of the government and second-guessing what the government is going to do. To hell with the consumer. Who cares? I mean, we are dependent on Big Brother, who is putting the money in circulation. So this is a very big difference, because, please consider this, under the gold standard, a true gold standard, it is the common people who decide what the quantity of money should be. It's not the central bank, it's not the government, it's not the banking system at large, but it is the consumer, the consuming public, people at large. Why? And we can put our finger right on the thing. Because a gold standard means, among other things, but the most important thing about the gold standard is that the mint is open to gold. So the individual could be consumer, could be producer, could be the gold miner, could be just a retired person who has some old jewelry. But if the people are not satisfied with the amount of money in circulation, they feel that there's not enough, all they have to do is take their gold to the mint and convert it into the coin of the realm. This is a constitutional right. It is written in the US Constitution, and actually it was brought in first by no lesser a man than Isaac Newton in Britain, because in the year 1717 the Royal Mint of Britain, which was housed in the Tower of London at that time, had to open its mint, which meant that unlimited amount of gold could be brought to the mint. The master of the mint, which was Newton himself at the time, I think until he died, he was in charge of the mint, he had the duty to convert the gold, just test the fineness, and then he had no choice but give you back the same quantity of pure gold, but now this was coined gold, so this was money, no question, you see. So this was a basic a fundamental right, civil right, if you will, in Britain, and the fathers of the American Constitution in their wisdom decided that this was a good model because it puts the power right into the hands of people where it belongs. And the US Constitution doesn't say anything about central bank, anything about the right of the government to decide what the quantity of money. It says that it's the people. The people are the seat of power. So under a properly set up gold standard, there is no question who is the piper, is there? The people, because people will, and by the way, the people can also reduce the quantity of money because it's also understood that they have the right to export coins or to melt them down or to hoard them. This is all part of it. So people ultimately, in acting in aggregate, not individually but in aggregate, decide what the quantity of money should be. And as a result, the producers are just too anxious to see how the consumer is going to behave. Because that is, they depend on it. Their prosperity depends on the consumer. They just have to go out and please the consumer. Now then comes a man named Franklin Delano Roosevelt, confiscates the gold coins, which is the ballot, a real ballot, not a paper ballot, so which consumers cast, not once in every second or every fourth year, but on a daily basis. Every time they consume, they cast, and they can withhold their vote too if they say, no, I just don't like any article which is put on the market. I dislike them. I want to force the producers to work harder for me and come up with a better product. So if too many consumers do that, then they are forcing thereby the producer to come up with a satisfactory product, either as far as price or quality is concerned. So the consumer is in charge, the people are in charge, and as a consequence, they call the tune, they are the piper. But a man by the name Roosevelt comes in and confiscates the gold coins. Under a heavy penalty, you are ordered to surrender your gold coins against paper scrips, called, also known as Federal Reserve notes. The gold goes to the treasury, and you are left with a paper which the producers may or may not respect. Perhaps in the beginning they respected it more, and then the system didn't deteriorate immediately because the consumer and the common people were taken away a very important right. That they were the pipers. They were calling the tunes, right? And the piper is the producer who has to play what the consumer wants. So this all happened in 1933 when Roosevelt confiscated the gold coins, and the result was not immediately obvious. But over the years, you could see the steady deterioration. The fact that the decision to set the level of money supply was shifted from the people to the banks or the Federal Reserve Board or the US Treasury, whatever the case may be, meant that the producers lost interest in the opinion of the people, in the opinion of the consumers. I think this is a very, very convincing example, and that's the way you should look at it. The people were deprived of their right to cast votes in that very crucial election, namely which producer deserves to survive and which should go. And that is the ballot in that kind of vote taking is the gold coin which the consumer spends or doesn't spend, and if he spends it then he will spend it on certain goods and the producer benefits, and if you are not one of them, then you probably will fall out of the rank of the consumers. So you might argue that the sovereignty of the consumer can be jeopardized by government actions. And this is what has happened in the 20th century. It was completely compromised. The consumer is probably no longer sovereign, because it can be overridden by government edict or central bank edict. And what is happening today is absolutely insane, that the central bank is issuing new money to the tune of trillions of dollars. They're creating this money out of thin air and throwing it into the pot, and this money competes with your hard-earned wages. You have to work for every dollar very hard. And then the central bank comes and creates all this new money out of nothing, but throws it in the pot, and then the hard-earned dollars are competing with this make-believe money, which is heavily outweighing the hard-earned money of the people, and the outcome cannot be in doubt. Ultimately, something has to give, and the monetary system is deteriorating. Perhaps on the last lecture, I will say more about this. But I think deflation is probably more likely, but ultimately even that is going to transform itself into hyperinflation, because when they are printing money at that clip, as they are doing, and then call it the beautiful name of quantitative easing. And now we are talking about quantitative easing number 2, because there was quantitative easing number 1, and it made zero difference. So now they say, one good quantitative easing deserves another, so let's have quantitative easing number 2. So this is the very sad situation. But I think the sovereignty of the consumer is still in the background, because people are still in charge after all. It's the people who made the American Revolution in the first place, wasn't it? It was a tax revolt against the British king, who laid taxes on the American colonies, which they thought that he shouldn't do without their consultation, and that's what the British kings did. They couldn't care less what the opinion of the people in the American colonies was, and they introduced new taxes. Taxes on tea? Can you believe that? Revolting because there is an increase in taxes. What about taxes on tobacco or taxes on basic foodstuff or whatever? You see, this is amazing. And then now I hear a lot of noise about tea parties in the United States. I haven't kept up with that, but perhaps some of you could fill us in what the Tea Party movement is.
Yeah, it's a bit of a conservative movement, and of course they're addressing some of these issues, but there's one component still missing. They're not ready to give up their own privileges. In other words, their own Social Security, their own Medicaid. The other people should give up all that stuff, but these are legitimate demands on the government. And I believe that when that ends, when people say, no, I don't want government handouts, I don't want government support, that'll be the real Tea Party. But that's not there yet.
So there is a real movement called one or several?
Oh, several. They're all
several. And this is a name which they apply to all of them, Tea Parties?
Yeah. Based on the original Boston Tea Party.
The Boston Tea
Party.
Party.
Threw the bags of tea and said, we'd rather not drink the tea than pay the tax. You see, they said, we don't drink the tea, we'll throw it away. So they gave up the tea. They didn't just say, we don't want to pay the tax, but we'll take the tea. They said, no, we don't want your tea, it's taxed. So it was a different attitude.
Yes. And now it's even the movement, the Tea Party movement in the States is getting corrupted.
Oh, the government knows how to do that.
Yes, of course. If it gets popular, of course, the Republicans are going to wear a disguise. Sarah Palin is being groomed to be the lead of the Tea Party. Can you imagine? So it won't be anything anymore.
No.
Sarah Palin.
Well, that's the way it is. That's the way it is.
Watch that space, you'll see.
Yeah.
I just have, actually I have a question for Louis, because he started to ask about financial products.
Yeah.
Now, I know you can replace products in your theory also with services. That would be fine to do.
And certainly at the input level, the producer is using services heavily at the input level. But the consumer also.
Some services are consumed also.
Yeah.
I'm still having a bit of a question mark on what financial product or service you can actually consume. Maybe I'm being hair-splitting, but maybe it's something else.
Can you consume knowledge? You can't. Because no matter how heavy use you make, the most up-to-date knowledge, that does not diminish the value knowledge may have for somebody else.
Or you consume alone because you use it in order to buy something or transact. You consume the loan, you know.
Well,
yes.
But anyway, my comment was the professor picked it up right away. Was more based on a non-gold standard environment.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But again, it just to me clearly shows that everything is corrupt. You know.
I haven't thought about this question at all, but my first reaction would be that under a gold standard, properly set up, financial services would be more like knowledge. You cannot use it up. I mean, a good financial advice to me is also a good financial advice to my neighbor. And as a result, the financial industry is a very positive contribution to the health of society, very much like knowledge and those researchers who devote their whole life to finding the truth and disseminating the truth. These two. No, it's not enough to find the truth if you keep it to yourself. You've got to disseminate. Now, a financial advisor today is probably going to make the trade himself for his own benefit first before he tips you off. In fact, this is what they call inside trading, that the insiders act first and then try to project this as a wonderful thing to do and let the crowd come in and make the same trade, because those who got in first will be the beneficiaries and they will take the hindmost. So I honestly, I don't trust the financial industry, and they come up with research results, and they are very pretentious, wonderful graphs and tables and all this, sometimes even mathematical formulas, and the image they try to project, there is a lot of hard work in it, and therefore this is at the same level of importance as the research done by medical scientists or physicists, rocket scientists, and so on. Well, I don't have that impression myself. I look at their arguments, I look at their results, and I just have very, very serious questions how honest this so-called research really is. There's always, of course, the exception there. I'm not trying to dismiss the whole industry as crooks. Like everywhere else, there are honest people and there are dishonest people working on a problem. I just have a feeling that there are more dishonest people in there who can even influence the honest colleagues and so on. So this is a complex situation, and it's very difficult to see through, but that's the way I feel about it. So, any other opinion or comment? What I'm going to suggest is that we could adjourn earlier today. In other words, we could cancel the discussion period, because I have run out of the topic. I don't want to start the last topic. In any case, tomorrow it's Rudy who is coming up with the first talk, and then we have only one session left on the last day, on the 19th, which I'll be happy to round up this course with some comments that apply to our present situation. But as far as today is concerned, what I'm suggesting is that 5:30 we adjourn, and then you may take advantage of the fine weather. We have much better weather now than a few days ago, and apparently the storm is not threatening us, so you may want to take advantage of that. But we still have about 12, 13 minutes, and I'll be happy to continue that discussion. Is that all right with you, that we don't have a second discussion session?
Yes.
Okay. So whatever question may occur to you, this is the time now to bring it up. Yes.
You said that the feedback effect under this gold standard environment where the consumer is sovereign only works one way.
Yeah.
That too, in a non-gold standard environment, does not hold, right? Because of the money creator. element brought in, it corrupts this, right? This doesn't work in our current environment, right?
Yes. So if you want to spell it out, what does it mean? What would the feedback effect mean in the opposite situation? It would mean that the producers would have a way to influence the consumers. Well, they go all out. You can deny that. In fact, I don't think, I couldn't prove this, but I always have the impression that the advertisement budget of a company under a gold standard would be much smaller than it is today. I just can't believe that this advertising, it's not even a campaign of advertisement, it's bombarding or brainwashing, and especially when it's addressed to younger children, it's just fantastic. Or women who can be tempted by changes in fashion, and a new product can be lionized, and a lot of housewives would fall for it because they feel that there's a need for it, but they don't see through the tricks. That's my feeling. So in other words, the feedback effect in the opposite direction is working under the paper money system. Thank you very much. That's the bottom line. Yes.
The number one advertising budget in the United States today is for medicines.
Yeah.
And it's not directed at doctors anymore. It's directed at TV watchers.
Yeah.
And it says, if you got this problem, ask your doctor about this medication. And there's billions being spent on that. And of course, this goes through the FDA, through government hands, and the kickbacks are tremendous there. So that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, you see, and this is terrible, really, because people are rightly concerned about their state of health and the various dangers which they are facing every day as far as their own health is concerned. So they are inclined to believe, because, let's just face it, we have to believe all the professions when they say something authoritatively, because after all, they know the facts. That's their job, to follow up on the facts, and therefore the first thing is that you accept the claims which pharmaceutical factors are making about their various products. And then what happens, it turns out that this whole process is poison. It's poison. There's a recent story about a pharmaceutical company in the United States which came out with a new drug to control blood sugar level. Now, if you are diabetic as I am, and hope you are not, because it's a nasty disease without symptoms, that's the nastiest thing about it. Sometimes you wish there were some symptoms like pain here or pain there, because then you would be conscious of the dangerous change in your blood sugar level. But anyhow, this company came out with a drug which can control the level, sugar, the blood sugar level better than anything else, even competes with insulin. And the American Food and Drug Administration, FDA, usually takes not years, but perhaps as long as a decade to hand down its verdict that this can be marketed in the United States or it cannot be marketed. So the United States Food and Drug Administration has given its blessing, and this drug is already available in the United States. And you know that's the biggest pharmaceutical market by far in the whole world, the American market. So when you get a verdict like that from the FDA, then you won the lottery. You are an easy street for the rest of your life. And people implicitly trust the FDA because it had some marvelous calls earlier. I don't know how many of you remember thalidomide, which was a drug for pregnant women, and the outcome was that the thalidomide babies were born without limbs, arms or legs. It was a terrible thing. And it happened I think in Germany, it happened, most of the thalidomide babies were born there, but not one in the United States because the Food and Drug Administration withheld its verdict for 10 years or longer, and then this came out. And then, of course, so the Food and Drug Administration has a very good record, and people tend to believe implicitly the decision. And what happened? This is really a fantastic story if you think about it. What happened was that some insider, some research worker who worked for that company had a grudge against the company. Either he didn't get the promotion or the salary increase he was expecting. That doesn't matter. The point is that he spilled the beans. He spilled the beans, and that was a story that the company selectively allowed certain laboratory and clinical results to go into the final report, and some others were simply suppressed. Those which were adverse, which could adversely affect the decision of the Food and Drug Administration. And so this became public knowledge. And there was an outcry. There was as you can expect. I mean, this is just a criminal activity to do that for a drug company, to falsify clinical and laboratory research results, which will have an effect on such an important decision, whether to allow this drug to be advertised under this label, or it should be like a pack of cigarettes that tobacco smoking could cause death, you know. If you can force the tobacco companies to put that label on your product, then why couldn't you force it? But anyhow, what happened was this. The facts were established that yes, such a tampering with the research of the pharmaceutical company did actually take place. Now, the Federal Food and Drug Administration, rather than immediately suspending the license, just sat back and said, well, that may be, but all that means is that from now on it's on the conscience of the doctor and the patient to make the decision for themselves whether they want that drug or not. Now that takes the cake. I mean, I just could not imagine a worse case of, with that, for me at least, the Food and Drug Administration sentenced its own, signed its own death sentence. I will never again believe a word what they pronounce. But that's what has happened. So, you see, there is this feedback for you. these pharmaceutical companies can dictate what the supervisory body should do, and they succeed. They get away with it. They do get away with it. It's incredible.
The budget of the FDA is mostly by participating companies, so you have to follow the money. The companies that are being regulated pay most of the fees and so on. So it's total conflict of interest and total corruption.
Not only that, when the FDA officials retire, they retire to extremely lucrative jobs for the companies they've been supervising.
And you know what these pharmaceutical companies are doing? They are wining and dining doctors and, flooding them with promotional literature and samples and this and that to induce them to make more and more prescriptions of their product. Now, I had a personal experience. I was in the hospital a couple of years ago. Actually, the purpose of my stay in the hospital was to stabilize my blood sugar levels. So this doctor was an internal medicine doctor, and we developed a very good rapport. And there was an epidemic of flu epidemic which hit the hospital very badly, so that actually the hospital had to be closed down for 2 weeks. And then it was reopened and I was admitted, and then I talked to this doctor, and the doctor told me that he himself contracted this flu or variants of a flu some 9 times. Incredible. Now, during 1 year, a 12-month period, he contracted the flu. And then I said, well, doctor, there are flu shots. Why didn't you
He knows what goes in there.
help your son? He said, I'm not suicidal. There you are. And that's a true story. I mean, it happened to me. I talked to this doctor. I still respect him. And that's what he told me. So,
I don't know if it's appropriate, but the comment on this flu shots. Apparently, at the beginning of the school year in America, in the United States, starting next month, there's always a process by which school kids get injected the flu vaccine for the season. And
at this time?
In September, October, after the school starts. And
After the
you will
school.
remember last year there was this great debate about H1N1, and it wasn't sufficiently tested, and there was going to be compulsory, and it was approved before all the tests were finished, and massively produced a great profit for the pharmaceuticals, but generally, unless it was made compulsory, people sort of didn't really want it. Well, here's the latest. It's included in the next seasonal flu vaccine.
Carried over the old stock, that's what you're saying?
So it's compulsory.
People will get it, whether they know it or like it or not.
Stay away from it.
Stay away from flu vaccine.
Yeah. Okay.
I can follow your argument, but I still don't quite get the bridge to paper money, to be honest, for both of your examples now.
I cannot prove it, but I have a feeling that under a properly constituted gold standard, there would be smaller advertising budgets for companies. Nobody would force them, but they just find the rate of no return. If you increase your advertising budget, that's pretty obvious. Sooner or later you will reach a level where the additional benefit will not justify the expense. So, working on their own, these companies would reach that point much sooner under the gold standard. I cannot prove it, but I remember days when money was taken more seriously than it is today, and that was the case. There was less advertising, and it was worth your while to go through the advertisements, make comparison. But today, to watch television and watch those promotionals for drugs is not just a waste of time, but it's a complete brainwashing.
Agreed, but
Yeah, now, that's one thing. The other thing is that these companies, under the fiat money system, have much greater power, this is the feedback which didn't exist before, to influence governments and through advertisement the consumer, and enhance their own power. And again, I cannot prove it, but I just have a feeling that this is the case. So the gold standard protects you in more ways than one. It's not just monetary, but your health is better protected under a gold standard than under the fiat money system. Simply because it does not put such an awful power in the hands of the pharmaceutical companies. And we also reached the point that some doctors are intimidated. They would like to speak up against the pharmaceutical companies, but they are afraid because the pharmaceutical companies could hit back in some subtle ways. I'm not saying they would be machine gun down on the street, but there could be a secret blacklist. Pharmaceutical companies could have a cartel, and they have a common blacklist, and if they blacklist a doctor, a doctor who discovered that a certain drug is not good for your heart, it's in fact harmful for your heart, and if that doctor refuses to prescribe it, he'll be blacklisted with all the consequences. So, well, we don't know. Really, this is not our topic, because I would prefer to talk about things which I can prove, and these things I cannot prove. Innuendos and hearsay, and some of them may be malicious, but you just can't help, because these things are happening.
I just want to add, my wife is in the health business, and if doctors make too much noise, they're not just blackballed, their licenses are lifted. They're no longer allowed to practice. And the other problem is there's tremendous power in the patent process, the monopoly process. Drug companies are driven to create patentable drugs. Not necessarily the most effective, the safest, patentable. And then for 17 years they charge whatever they want. And strangely enough, as the patents start to run down, new versions, better versions of the similar drug are brought on the market, and the old ones go, wow, these are not so good anymore.
But none of this would occur.
None of this?
None of this improper feedback coming from the producer would occur in a gold standard.
I believe
that's the real message here, isn't it?
I do
Because
believe
the consumer would be sovereign.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important.
Whether a patent is allowed under, patented goods are intellectual capital that get legal protection for a number of years.
There would not be any patent of some sort, but I think it would be to some extent the concept of the duration or the value. It would be driven by a consumer willingness.
We've heard here the perfect arguments against legal protection.
There were patents on mechanical systems, but not on life forms, and not on medicine, and not on seeds, and not on other things. And these are all achieved through lobbying efforts, throwing money to Congress.
Well, they patent a molecule.
Lobbying is part of that improper feedback.
Yes.
Let me give you another true story, which I can personally testify that it's absolutely true. I worked for a congressman in Washington, D.C. by the name William Donnemeyer. He's of German origin. I think he was born in the United States, but his parents were immigrants from Germany. And he was a congressman in California, Orange County. And I worked in his office for 5 years. And I came to admire this man very much. By the way, Ron Paul and Donnemeyer were personal friends, so I got introduction to Ron Paul. I admire both men very much. And Donnemeyer started out as a judge in the state of California, and he later became a congressman, and I don't know how many congresses he has served, but quite a number. And he invited me. I mean, how does a Canadian get into a congressional office? He invited me. He heard me speak at a meeting, and then he called me and asked me if I could come to Washington and work for him, and I was very happy to accept his invitation, and those were my best years, those 5. And I have very, very pleasant. I've never enjoyed an employee-employer relationship so much in my life as I enjoyed working for him. Now, he came to Congress with the specific agenda of monetary and fiscal reform. And he was the leader of those handful congressmen who wanted monetary and fiscal reform, in particular the gold standard, but the agenda was wider because you had to control government deficits and so on. So I was working on this, and he devoted most of his time to this issue. And I came to know his wife as well, Evelyn, very, very fine lady, very pleasant, quiet, but and she contracted cancer and died of cancer. In the meantime, Donnemeyer retired from Congress, but he still was full of energy, and when his wife died, he decided to abandon the fight for honest money, which looked hopeless to him. He was convinced that his wife's life could have been saved, and if she had to die, it was because what they call, at least in California, alternative medicine was pushed to the sidelines. There were alternative treatments for cancer, and I don't want to go into this because I don't know enough about it, but this seems to be a fact because Donnemeyer studied this very, very thoroughly, and he was trying to get a practitioner to try one of these alternative medicine, But no, it was always the standard thing: chemotherapy or this or that or that, and or surgery, but no alternative medicine. And then the wife died, and he decided to spend the rest of his life, Donnemeyer, to fight for legalization, or at least change this attitude that alternative medicine was given a bad name and just had to be that. He convinced me that this was another impossible fight. He had the facts, he had the arguments, he was willing to travel thousands of miles and make speeches here and there. But it was like a wall, banging your head against the wall. There's just nothing you could do. The power of partly the pharmaceutical industry, partly the what's the name for the board of medical doctors? Yeah, they shut you out, and your voice will not be heard. It's as simple as that. You might have free press and this and that. It's not going to make a change. So that's another experience of mine, which convinced me that there's more than just hearsay to this. There are some hard facts down there, and those who are devoted enough to a cause to dig them out, and you won't even hear about it. All right, is there any more to add to this? This was quite unofficial. I don't want to go on record that I'm either pro or con doctors or pharmaceutical. I depend myself on a lot of drugs, and I don't want to be blacklisted by anyone.
Well, in conclusion, I think I've read an article or a paper of yours where you mentioned that when you use unadulterated gold standard, you have the best money. And when you have the best money, you can also, and you are entitled to, the absolute best goods and services that you can buy.
Including medical services.
Exactly. And if you have paper money, well, you get...
God help you.
So we have gone a bit over time, but that was foreseen.
And that's it for today, all right?
See you tomorrow.